אלוקינו עמך ישראל ובתפילתם, והשב את העבודה לתביר ביתך, ואישי ישראל ותפילתם ואהבת גבל ברצון, ותהי רצון תמיד עבודת ישראל עמך, ותרצנה עינינו ושובך לציון רחמים, ברוך אתה השם, המחזיר שכינתו לציון.
In 1893, immigrants from Lithuania were living in the West End of Boston, and they came together and they formed a Landsmannschaft, which is basically a community of neighbors from the old world. Gradually, that sort of turns into a congregation, but it was of that unifying characteristic of being a Lithuanian Jew, being a Litvak, that united them. And so they called themselves Anshe Vilna, the people of Vilna, and that becomes Vilna Congregation, and eventually Vilna Shul is sort of the name that we've taken on.
Today in Boston itself, there's not a big Jewish presence anymore. A lot of the Jews have moved out to the suburbs. We're starting to see a resurgence in young professional Jews moving back into Boston, but I think it's really important that we preserve this piece of Boston's history because at one time there were a lot of Jews here, and this, as a Jewish people living in this part of the world, this city is part of our heritage, but we're also part of the city's heritage. And if you lose the Vilna Shul as the last remaining immigrant-era synagogue in Boston, you're going to lose that whole piece of history.
Immigration comes to basically a screeching halt in the 1920s when quotas are imposed. And so this flood of Eastern European immigrants that made up most of our congregation, they can't continue coming. With nobody new coming to replace the old immigrants, and a lot of the immigrants that are more established moving out of the West End and the immigrant neighborhood, the congregation naturally begins to decline.
I'll just look up and just, sometimes go off thinking about the Jews who were here before me and the different people who have been in this building over the years. And I think this is a really important part of Judaism, that you are part of a continuum. You don't exist by yourself. Not only are you part of a community, but you are part of this long heritage, and you're inheriting these traditions.
From 1959 or so until the 1990s, this is not really the neighborhood to be in, and so the congregation gets smaller as the neighborhood gets worse, and it's in 1985 that there's really only one member of this congregation left. His name's Mendel Miller. Mendel got mugged one day leaving the building and decided it wasn't worth it anymore, and so he went to dissolve the congregation. The building ends up being launched into about 10 years of land court and disputes.
It looked for a bit as though this building would be torn down and there would be parking here. I mean, this is a neighborhood with no parking. Preservationists and people in the Jewish community began saying, let's not do this.
A couple of guys were walking past the building one day, and it still sort of had a very abandoned feel to it. And they hopped the fence and broke in, and they just kind of looked around and really liked it and proposed to the board of directors that they'd like to start holding services here again. And it took a little bit of time to convince them that this was a good idea because the building hadn't been used in this way in such a long time, and the neighborhood by this time was getting better, and there were more young people living here and coming to this area, and it was becoming sort of a cool place in the city to hang out again.
I was first here shortly after the building was saved. I got a call from Claude Menders, the architect, asking me to come in and look in the sanctuary and provide a wall color and a trim color. I immediately said to Claude, having known this building, having lived in the neighborhood previously, gosh, this is the kind of building we have to look for painted decoration in. Claude said, we don't have the money to do that now, but while you're in the building, take a look. And it'd be interesting to hear if you find anything. Within seconds almost, saw the impasto, and by that I mean a raised relief of a semicircle low above the dado. I thought, gosh, that looks like we're seeing decoration ghosting through. Well, the pattern was that pretty much every place I looked, I found something.
The idea came about that maybe the Torah should come back to the building. And so that was finally approved, and because of that, we can now have bar and bat mitzvahs and things in the building. We've had baby namings and a bris and other sort of Jewish life cycle events. And then a few years after that, the idea came about that maybe we could have high holiday services in the building.
I became involved with the high holidays, and a congregation had died off. And so when I was talking about this with other people, there's a sense of we're reviving something that disappeared. And there's always a sense of when you do something like that, it's a very special thing to be a part of. And knowing that we're a part of that, keeping it alive, something that it may be a different tradition, but just being able to keep it alive, I think, is a great thing that we can do.
There are a number of generations of decorative paint, and there's been a decision made to reveal the original decoration. Typically, we're always trying to preserve and maintain and keep all works of art. In this case, it's kind of odd because we are going to be removing these later restorations to reveal the original decoration, and by doing that, we'll be destroying what was subsequently painted on the wall. And from that, I think what they're going to do is restore the rest of the walls and perhaps have a decorative painter come in and replicate that original design on a lot of the other walls so that we get a unified kind of view of what the original decoration was like. Really, nobody remembers what it looked like before the beige paint went on. So I think this will be just this great moment of discovery.
The whole tradition of painted synagogues in Europe that we see, pre-World War II, which is almost completely annihilated during the war, that there's only very few left. And all of a sudden, here we have this tradition here in Boston, and we see it transported across the Atlantic Ocean.
My family came to South Africa from Lithuania, back in the 1880s. I think being an immigrant myself, I had a sense of a path that other immigrants had traveled, and it resonated. And when I sit here, you do feel transported back to the old country. It gives you a connection with that aspect of my Jewish identity.
To come in here and see what these people chose to decorate their synagogue with, how they chose to decorate it, and the images they chose, I just think it's fascinating and it's beautiful. And I'm so excited as I'm watching this mural. Every month I come and there's more uncovered, and it's so exciting every month to come and see, what is actually here.
The Vilna Shul has really kind of taken on a life of its own and become a valued piece of the Jewish fabric of Boston.